Hello there, thanks for joining me, Jessy Chahal, on this edition of the Nation Update. Lots to share with you, of course, on the back of the 12th Malaysia plan that was tabled at Parliament, of course, headed by the Prime Minister as well. Now, looking at the 12th Malaysia plan, we now know that new taxes may be possible to enable 400 billion ringgit in budget in terms of the years 2021 till 2025 for development while trying to keep deficits low. Malaysia will also need to focus on tech investments under this plan. Now, on the show today, I'm joined by Datuk Dr. A.T. Kumararajah, Secretary General of MAICCI, as well as Fadli Bakhtiar, Program Director at EcoKnights on World News Day. And I'd also like to focus on climate change. Now, let's take a quick zoom into some of the trending news stories here around the country. Firstly, Transport Minister has rubbished rumors regarding driving license holders above 70 years old to return their license back to JPJ. Now, in this conversation or this statement, Datuk Sri Wika Siong had stressed that this has never been his ministry's stand and that driving competency was also not based on age. This comes following reports of Bukit Aman Traffic Investigation and Enforcement Department Director Dato' Aziz Man alias suggestion that the renewal of senior citizens' driving license to be restricted, citing that health condition could be a factor contributing to accidents. Well, moving on, according to economists, the Malaysian government could possibly still introduce new taxes in order to have sufficient funds for the historic 400 billion allocation by the government for developing the nation in the next 5 years under the 12th Malaysia Plan. Now, this is due to the government's plan on the annual budget deficit to be lower by the time the 12th Malaysia Plan ends in year 2025, where the government has to obtain more revenue in order to meet the targeted deficit while still being able to earmark 400 billion ringgit for the 5-year period. The Prime Minister tabled the long-anticipated 12th Malaysia Plan at the Dewan Rakyat, of course, which aims at achieving the objective of Keluarga Malaysia, the Malaysian family, that is prosperity, inclusivity and sustainability for the Malaysia family. Now, according to Datuk Sri Dr. Muhammad Uzair Mahidin, Chief Statistician, he says Malaysia needs more achievement in new technologies, including the development of digital systems, which will strengthen the country's economic growth under the 12th Malaysia Plan. Now, the country no longer needs infrastructure investments. Instead, it is more likely to benefit from investments that would enhance the economic sector in terms of digitalization. Under the 12th MP, the country is targeting to boost investments from the private and public sectors to 258 billion and 80 billion ringgit respectively, again, by the year 2025. Now, we know that the 12th Malaysia Plan is a long-term plan drawn up at the macro level, taking into account Malaysia's aspiration of becoming a developed nation. 400 billion ringgit set aside for existing new projects. It's apparently the biggest development plan for the next 5 years. This is the first major national policy document by the current PM, of course, who's rather new in office as well. The budget is a 54% jump from Najib's 11th iteration, worth 260 billion ringgit. Let's bring in right now a better mind to help us navigate this. Datuk Dr. A.T. Kumararajah, Secretary General at MAICCI. Datuk, before I get your thoughts on the key insights, yesterday I spoke to analyst Ovi Sun. He said that this plan is realistic. I told him to describe it in one word. That's the word he used. Now, to add to that, the distribution of wealth and sustainability are pragmatic goals. We are not dreaming of a growth rate number like we used to back in the 90s, Datuk. Where are you with this?
Right. Okay. So I must again put a reality check on what you said, Jessy. Maybe you belong to the millennials where you saw this tiger growth in the economy, and whether we were even a tiger has been disputed at some times. But while we had this very high, in fact, early teens growth, but today look at the realities in the 12th Malaysia Plan. I would beg to differ that while those plans are realistic, maybe in the pre-pandemic level, have we taken the post-pandemic approach? And have we taken the damage that has been done, albeit permanently in many of the sectors? So if you take the 11th Malaysia Plan as a benchmark, even if you use the first 4 years minus the pandemic, which brings the average growth rate for the first 11th Malaysia Plan to 2.7%, if we only use the first 4 years, we're looking at 4.6% growth rate. That's at best. But if you look at the targets that we have set up in the 12th Malaysia Plan for the next 5 years, that's at 4.5 to 5.5%. Now, the best case scenario of 11th Malaysia Plan against the worst case scenario performance that we expect in the next 5 years is about at tandem. I'm really not sure whether the structural changes in the economy has been so drastically well in the positive manner, or in a way where we can actually have this huge pivoting of growth from 4.6% to somewhere in the middle of 5% in the next 4 years. Mind you, we are doing this in 2021. 12th Malaysia Plan is 2021. We have lost out a good 1 year. We will lose out this last quarter, which means realistically, it's a 5-year plan in a 4-year implementation timeline with a reality of you doing the best of your 11th Malaysia Plan at minimum in the 12th Malaysia Plan, taking into account that we actually already have headwinds in the regional market. We actually have headwinds in the global market in terms of growth returning back in the next couple of years.
So what I'm hearing you say, Dato, is that you feel or you believe that against these numbers and stats that we are looking at, this plan at this point of time is unrealistic.
I would think it's not had a reality check after the post-pandemic approach. So while this plan may have been well formulated in the pre-pandemic phase, I really think the pandemic check must be applied. I'm not sure whether we want to wait for the midterm review of the plan or whether we want to probably do it. I think some of the reality checks will happen as we understand some of the discussions that happen. I'm quite an optimist in this way. I think the finance minister and even the prime minister and the EPU ministers and the EPU department has actually been quite proactive in engaging for the 2022. So while the 12th Malaysia Plan, the 2022 will be the second budget for that 5-year plan, I think some of the reality check will happen in this year. And I think really if I had less than 24 hours to run through the plan, but if you look at some of the granular numbers that have been put up, I'm not really sure whether those numbers are achievable. Like even if you look at the labor productivity, right? So we have had 1.1% growth for the first 5 years of the 11th Malaysia Plan. Now we have put 3.6% in the 12th Malaysia Plan. This 3.6% as it is already 3 times jump. Unless the labor force has gone through a huge transformation in this timeline, and I'm not really sure whether we can translate to that 300% increase in the labor productivity that we want.
All right. So these numbers and figures that you're pointing out when you say granular as well, I'm looking at these same numbers on my screen. Let's understand that the 12th Malaysia Plan encompasses 3 main themes, and that is to reset the economy, to strengthen the well-being, security, and inclusivity, as well as to advance sustainability. Overall, based on these numbers right now that you say are granular in form, but also far-fetched at this point, that perhaps put aside being the benchmark of sorts, what are your thoughts on the main economic goals that we have here? How would you approximate this?
No, I think, again, optimist in me says that I think we can really push for this because I think the government has brought back the narrative of having those low-hanging fruits, the industries that we want to concentrate on. So I think we must also look at where did we achieve. So if you look at the export market, the manufacturing sectors that are based on the export market, I think we're doing very, very well. I think government is rightly started pointing out, look, at the high growth, high impact areas will come from things like electronics and electrical. It will come from some of our agro or smart agriculture that we want to profess to have. Even the services sector, as we move on to even region beyond Malaysia, if you look at some of the things like halal market, the biomass market, some of even the third theme, which is sustainability, I think it's very positive. At least in the first 5 years, we're taking the sustainability approach. So those SDG goals, whether it's UN based or ESG that has worked out in some of the corporates are already imbibing that into their culture and the way they do business in terms of the ESG goals. I think those are very positive. If you look at the well-being, which is the second theme, that the whole socio-economic well-being of our nation, of our people, and if you look at the economic and the social well-being context, I think the economic context we have done well. But if you look at the social composites, whether you're looking at higher social participation, environment, governance, we have done well. But if you look at a component where we're not really done very well, is looking things like family. We're looking at the non-communicable diseases. I think the areas of that we may have even suffered worse during the pandemic year, where suicide rates are high, divorce rates are high. So if you really look at the well-being index that we want to achieve, I'm not sure that realities have been also checked on those numbers, because we would have had a bad time in the last 1 year, and now to bounce back, unless we have a huge resources being allocated. In fact, that we must also understand that government is actually stretching it. We have been very physically disciplined, but now we have been an expansionary policy. I mean, we have had about $550 million, $50 billion in terms of investments in the eight economic stimulus packages come. So our inflation, our deficit at 6.5% now, right? And we have got 58%
right. Okay, if I was to just jump in again and just to circle back, towards looking at the main themes as well. It does seem, and from what you're saying, I gather that your opinion and outlook, and perhaps many others out there as well, feel that this plan could be a little bit optimistic at this point, given the fact that we've lost a year and we really have to either kickstart, jumpstart at some point and bounce, not just back better, but in back further. In fact, I want to highlight this point right now, which is also part of the 12th MP, and that is about greenhouse gas emission. There is a target to reduce this by 45% to the GDP by the year 2030. Again, not very long to go there. Compared with levels back in 2009, where are we based? In terms of climate change, in terms of how aggressive that might be against this particular objective or target that we have in the 12th Malaysia Plan, Datuk?
So Jessy, I think this is again something that businesses, even chambers, and all of us have been engaged, and this narrative has actually come back center stage. I think the idea of this triple bottom line must be visited. Whether we look at the carbon emission, whether we look at energy intensity, or whether we look at even renewable energy. All these narratives work very, very well, not with the micro or the SMEs. It will probably work well with the medium-sized companies and definitely the larger companies. So I think this has to be a top-down approach. The best practices has to be imbibed. The smaller companies need to learn and says, look, the big boys are already going along those lines. So even if you have those affirmative stories of, look, if you only subscribe to certain levels of this climate change or ESG or SDG goals, and the sustainability is actually one of the areas where you're focusing on, then maybe you'll be part of our procurement system, or whether you'll be part of a vendor development system. So if the big boys start putting in these measures, and I think the larger MSMEs will actually pivot onto that bandwagon. If not, we're very hard for the smaller companies to bring in this, because there is this cost of doing business is going to go higher. So it must be from a best practice approach, and then cost becomes reduced for us.
Thank you very much, Datuk, for weighing in and sharing your perspective and view on the 12th Malaysia Plan. That was Dr. A.T. Kumararajah, Secretary General of MAICCI, weighing in with the 12th Malaysia Plan. Lots of discussions unfolding as well as we really look closely at this perhaps grand plan. But it is true, we have lost a year, and we must sort of, have all guns out, so to say, to ensure we can reach these objectives as well. Now let's move on. As we were talking to Dato about climate change as well, that still remains one of the hottest and most important topics as we move forward into the future. But mercury is rising, and it is not fever. Over the past half a century, the surface temperature has risen by 0.13 Celsius in Sarawak, by 0.16 in Sabah, and by 0.25 in Peninsular Malaysia. And this is happening every 10 years, every decade. Now, while this may seem like a small number, negligible to the layman, climate experts are already sounding the alarm. They say just a 1.5 degrees Celsius increase in temperature will destroy 70% to 80% of the world's coral reefs. This according to Ecotourism and Conservation Society Malaysia President and Chief Executive Officer Andrew Sebastian. Malaysia is already close to that. What's the moral of the story here? Within the next 5 decades, average surface temperatures will be as much as 1.5 degrees Celsius higher than it is now if nothing is done today. So, with climate change and the 12th Malaysia Plan, the Prime Minister, when he was tabling this at the Day One Raya, expressed his commitment that Malaysia will be a carbon neutral country by as early as 2050. The Prime Minister explained that low carbon investment in green technology would be able to support the country's sustainable development agenda, as well as promote Malaysia as a green investment hub. We've got high hopes, we've got our perspective in the right direction. But again, at its basic, climate change is the average weather in a place over the many years. Climate change is a shift in those average conditions, climate versus climate change. To tell us a little bit more and give us a better perspective as well, joining me in conjunction with World News Day is Fadli Bakhtiar from EcoKnights. World News Day's theme this year is climate change. Fadli, thanks for joining us. Thanks for doing this as well. Very quickly, perhaps, in the most simplest and informative terms, tell us, what is climate change? What's
Yes,
changing?
thank you, Jess, for having me. So, okay, in the simple context, climate change is a change in the common usual weather, as you mentioned, in a place. So, climate can be different from different seasons. For like example, in Malaysia, it's always hot and humid all year round compared to other four seasons countries, right? However, over the last decades, our global climate is changing. So the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC as we call it, in its most recent published report, found that it is estimated that there's a new chance of us crossing the global warming level of 1.5 degrees Celsius in the next decades. And we are already above the pre-industrial level. So pre-industrial level is basically a reference period of 1850 to 1900 to represent the pre-industrial temperature. So these emissions of greenhouse gases from our human activities are responsible for now approximately about 1 to 1.1 degrees Celsius since this pre-industrial temperature. And this
Right. So
human
here
induced.
in Malaysia, Fadli, where are
Yep.
we at this point?
So if you want to talk about uh, uh, within the Malaysian context, the environmental issues we are facing because of climate change are mainly due to, again, unsustainable developments such as land degradation and deforestation, overconsumption of natural resources, and overproductions for industries and consumers, reliance on fossil energy or non-renewable energy, waste management, and many others. So globally, the Southeast Asia countries are prone to sea level rising due to its geographical location. And in the
Mhm.
recent IPCC report, Malaysia will, if not already, be facing this crisis. So all this resulted in carbon emission that release in our atmosphere. We are already looking at about, I think, 30 over gigatons. And what
Right, which
we,
brings me
yeah,
to this point,
yeah,
Fad, if I can just jump
yeah,
in.
sure,
Earth
sure,
is now in a
definitely.
period of rapid climate change that we know, with
Yeah,
global temperatures already rising. Human
yeah,
activities have increased with CO2 emissions, driving up
yeah,
temperatures as well. Extreme weather and melting polar ice are also among the other effects that we're seeing here and
yeah,
there, and can possibly be even greater. Our answer usually is, I live in KL. How? I can't do anything about it, so on and so forth. But it just seems that we cannot go down that road anymore. What should
Mm.
we be cognizant of at this point, Fad?
Well, if someone says that I live in KL, how does it relate to everything else that is happening around the world? First of all, cities are definitely where most of the activity is happening. So we are actually contributing to the human activities compared to other places. And there's a lot of, again, consumption and productions. And especially cities, we're looking into low carbon cities as one of the reasons. Because when you stay in the big cities like KL, there's a lot of things happening, and that resulted in many other factors affecting the climate. So,
Mhm.
but to me, or for me, I would say we should ask ourselves, will climate change even affect me or not? But no matter what we care about, as a society, we can be responsible consumers, right? Because we consume a lot of things, and it starts within ourselves. And it takes one small click in our mindset to change the behaviors of our action. I mean, we always talk about bring your own bags, to reduce single-use plastic. But trust me, every single things that you do to reduce the amount of your daily consumption to minimal, balanced lifestyle, even having a small area where you plant herbs or vegetables is always a
Mhm.
good idea, especially during this pandemic. You can source your own food because uh,
We have seen a rise in that. Many people have taken
yes,
towards
that's
home
good, right?
gardening. Even
Yeah.
in the offices, I think they've got a green patch here and there. So yes, I think also in this pandemic, people have become a lot more aware and understanding in terms of food security, food supply, proper nutrition. In terms of being healthy as well, and perhaps that has triggered a lot more awareness and wanting to create a safer environment for ourselves as well.
Yep.
Let's look at the 12th Malaysia Plan, Fad. There's of course this target and aim to reduce greenhouse gas emissions intensity, and that also by pretty large number, by 45% by the year 2030. As excited as
Mm.
I am about this as well, why was this not highlighted or sort of um, um, pushed for before, and how serious are we, in your opinion, in terms of what
Mm.
infrastructure that's there already to move forward?
Okay, so just to give a little bit of context, Malaysia is ranked near the bottom of the Global Climate Change Performance Index, which compares the climate protection performance of countries that accounts for 90% of greenhouse gas emissions. So from ranking about I think 39 in 2016, now we're at 56, which is at the bottom five. The government needs to be more robust, innovative, and serious with its commitment to combat climate change. I think it's because, like I think what Datuk Eti mentioned earlier, it has to be a top-bottom approach. If the big industries are not serious about best practices, the SMEs, the middle size, the small businesses will not be able to take up the trend. So that's one thing that I think needs to be pushed. Agencies like Malaysian Green Technology and Climate Change Centre, or MGTC, under the Ministry of Environment and Water, is one of the agencies that mandated to drive the country in scope of the green growth, climate change mitigation, and green lifestyle. So I think I've worked with MGTC and I can see that they are really really robust in trying to meet that. But again, it's not just one agency, it's not just one ministry, it's the whole government, the whole citizens. But from my point of view, if I may, it's remarkable to see that the younger generations are heading into the right directions to taking climate action activism more seriously. We are seeing
Yeah.
more and more initiatives taken by young individuals and movements and groups, and this needs to be reciprocated with effective policymaking by the government, right? Because as a responsible government is about doing the right thing as lawmakers and policymakers. The livelihood of the citizens depend on the capability of this government to lead the country into a more sustainable future for us. We don't have much time within 2030 or between 2550, all these commitments. But at the rate we are going is going to be really really tricky, like what Dr. AT has mentioned before. Like we have to be really really it's like a long shots that we have to really take. So um, I want to stay optimist, but at the same time, I still think that um, we all have to do our parts, really.
That's right. And the work has to start right now. It doesn't matter where you are and how much you can do, but every little bit will count for, whether you're an activist, you're speaking out, or you're sharing this with friends, or even having a little project that you can sort of be part of as well, to help start or get
Yeah,
that ball rolling wherever you
yeah,
are.
Jessy, what they say, the work starts yesterday.
Yeah. I was going
Yeah,
to say that. I was going to, it's just on top of my head. I
yeah,
was going to say we should have started yesterday, but
yes,
it's
yes, but
never too late. So
yeah,
let's begin now.
we have to be always looking forward to it, because it's all about what are we leaving to the next generations, really. You know.
That's right. Thank you so much, Fadli, for weighing in and sharing your thoughts as well on climate change in conjunction with World News Day. We'll speak to you soon. That was
Thank you,
Fadli
Jessy.
Bakhtiar from EcoKnights, an NGO, weighing in, of course, on his thoughts around climate change and the fact that we can all really come together and still make a difference and make a change. Now, our topic on climate change, of course, is in conjunction with Bernama's observance of the World News Day. And what is World News Day? Well, it's a global campaign to display support for journalists and their audiences who use facts and understanding to make the world a better place. I'm taking you through very quickly right now a snapshot of international news, what's going on around the world. The rug industry, for example, one of the oldest and most profitable local industries in Afghanistan, has been confronted with multiple difficulties along with the other sectors during the country's major changes, of course, in recent months as well. Now, with the change of government, disruption in banking services, closure of borders, especially the closing of air corridors, the industry has been plunged into difficulties. So most rug makers are saying that they have lost their jobs, and few remaining, those that have remained or being able to sustain so far, have earnings falling really sharply. And of course, at the Great Barrier Reef, as turbines sprays microscopic seawater particles across a section of Australia's Great Barrier Reef, researchers are using a technique known as cloud brightening to protect vulnerable corals from bleaching. Now, the water droplets evaporate, leaving only tiny salt crystals that float up into the air, allowing water vapor to condense them, or rather to condense around them, causing clouds to form. So a bit of a technology input in there as well, hoping that this initiative will lessen over time, unless other measures slow the march of climate change in terms of helping to save these coral reefs. Now, the UN Secretary General has appealed for a green and equitable restart of the tourism industry, which saw a drastic decline, I guess, all across the world, of course, due to the COVID-19 outbreak. Now, in the first 5 months of this year alone, international tourist arrivals dropped by a staggering 95% in different parts of the world, and forecasts suggest a loss of over $4 trillion to global GDP by the end of this year as well. So with more relaxations and more sectors opening up, the targeted action and investment to shift towards green tourism with high emitting sectors including air and sea transport, as well as hospitality, moving forward towards a more carbon neutral ecosystem as well. Hey, what's happening on Twitter? Well, let me bring you up to speed. Of course, on a local Twitter, Twitter Jaya, everyone's talking about the 12th Malaysia plan. This was presented by the Prime Minister, and that's, of course, widely being discussed online as well. Kultus Matahari, people on Twitter have been sharing their progress on absorbing energy from sunlight, as well as the importance of sun drying at certain times of the day, which is believed to regulate the body's sleep-wake cycle, or your circadian rhythm. Also, Lee Zijia, fellow Malaysians on Twitter, have been congratulating the All England champion on his recent victory over England at the Sudirman Cup 2021. That brings me to the end of this program. Thank you so much for being with me. I'm on Twitter. If you need to share your thoughts or have something to say, I'll be more than happy to hear from you. Till next time, stay safe, stay at home. Bye-bye.